Hi, I'm Khushboo Razdan, and this is the Foreign Correspondents Talk Series 2024, an initiative by the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents USA, where we invite distinguished members of the foreign press community to talk about their works and experiences. And today, I'm joined by a journalist who's seen it all, from the war zones in the Middle East to the sunny beaches of Los Angeles. All right, so I'll start right away. And my first question is if you could tell me something about like your journey as a journalist and why you decided to pursue this career.
Mhm. Well, I think for me, it wasn't a very deliberate chase towards journalism. I always say that I think journalism found me. If anything, I sort of really enjoyed from a young age. Straight after college, I basically went to Israel, Palestine, and to work there with a local NGO that was partners with Save the Children UK at the time. And even when I was doing the kind of NGO work as a research assistant, I loved being in the field. I loved talking to people, finding stories. And then it was just that additional bit where, some of the journalists that I met along the way, they always said, well, you're carved out for this, you're just missing the publishing part. Everything you do, you love to document stories and find them out. You just have to publish it. And that's what we do, as media. And so that's really the way they sort of found me. And then a relationship that I cultivated over there with a Turkish television crew, actually. They were just very recently based there in Jerusalem. And they wanted to really tell the story to the wider Turkish public, but they were new there, and they were looking for a producer. And when they met me, this young Turkish guy who sort of speaks the languages and is already working there, with a local NGO as a research assistant, they started sort of getting help from me in identifying some of the stories, finding some leads, or in sometimes just getting some translations done. And that just sort of turned into a field producer job. And from there on, I mean, fast forward, what is it now, 15 years or so, and here I am.
Do you remember some of your first stories? I remember like all my stories. I remember exactly how I started, what was my first story. Do you remember like what story you did like as a reporter for the first time?
The very first story, I don't remember, but I think I do remember very clearly the first story that I did on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I said, I sort of started just like contributing in small ways, maybe just like getting one filming done and maybe one interview done. But the first story that I did entirely on my own, I remember it very clearly. It was from a village outside of Hebron. And, the local community there, they really struggled in farming. It had to do with local Palestinian politics, and it had to do with Israel, some of the limitations posed by the occupation, obviously. And so, but it
Mm-hmm.
was something new. It was a new trend, and nobody had picked up on it. And yet there I was. I don't know how I learned about the story, and I went there and interviewed this whole family. And I shot these amazing pictures and put it all together in a TV story. And it was probably the first time most people saw it and learned about it, and that gave me such joy, honestly.
Mm-hmm. And so, if I remember correctly, you said that you spent 9 years in the Middle East.
Give or take.
So how was that experience? How was 9 years? Were you like located in only in one country, or you kept traveling from one country to another and covering different stories and different people and different beats?
I Yes, the latter. I couldn't stay put, but honestly, I was kind of stuck in a way in the whole Israel-Palestine story. I think it happens to a lot of people, which I noticed early on when I looked around me.
Mhm.
Because everywhere else, people go, they're stationed for 3, 4 years and people move on. And I just realized that's sort of like a vacuum. It's so interesting. People sort of like get stuck there. It's kind of this, binge watching a show on Netflix. This, you know, it's a 6, now almost 7 decade conflict. And once you sort of get into the heart of it, you don't want to leave. You're always curious, well, what happens next? Well, what happens now after the Israeli elections, then after the Palestinian, then after the US elections? You always wonder about the next episode. And I think that's how I sort of got stuck there.
Mhm.
But there are times when it got too much. So already in my second or third year, the Arab Spring kicked off. Suddenly I found myself in Egypt. I was in Libya covering the civil war for I don't know how many months. You know, I was pretty much there up until, you know, Gaddafi went down. I didn't really cover the aftermath. I was sort of back in Israel, Palestine, but I also ended up covering Syria for nearly 2 years, and that was really, really, really challenging.
Mhm.
It was very difficult for just journalists overall when ISIS had taken over, you know, a huge chunk of Syria. It was basically a black box. No journalists, hardly any journalists could go in there. We didn't know what was happening, and it was really my job to work for months to secure a sort of safe entry. And I think that was one of my breakthrough moments as well. I sort of became the first journalist to really go in and access the, well, what was held by ISIS. And the moment they started withdrawing from, starting with Jarablus, a city sort of neighboring Turkey, I
Mhm.
was the first international journalist to go in there. And from there on, I mean, it was a very risky business. Obviously, our colleagues were being kidnapped, in some cases even decapitated. Every month we were hearing really tragic news, so we had to be extra careful of where we go exactly, how much time we spend, you know, have a plan B, C, D, and just, you know, take as minimal risks as we can while we try to cover an area which was practically a black box, you know. And then that was really tiring. And I think at the end of my Syria experiences, when I thought I needed another gig, and I think my mom was practically begging me to change my job at that point.
Uh-huh. Did it change you as a person? Did it change your perspective when you see so much, destruction around you? You said that your colleagues were being killed. That impacts you as a person. I mean, people just see us on ground and then they believe that we just tell what's happening and it's not impacting us. And I remember at J school we had like special classes for processing those experiences as a journalist, like as a person. So did it change you as a person? Did it change the way you see stories? Did it change the way you see personal relationships?
I mean, I think yes, most definitely, and in many ways, I would say, because it certainly takes a toll on you. I don't think anybody can, you know, deny that. But also, I mean, psychologically, it's very uh, difficult. Um, and I want to tell this in two ways. I mean, first of all, I think I really learned to compartmentalize. Um, Basically, when you're there, there's a lot that is shocking. You know, anything from just bodies laying around, or people who are going through an extraordinary tragedy. And you don't even know how to tell this story, how to share it with the rest of the world, and which shots, which pictures to use without really, you know, sensationalizing the whole thing, which is in a way quite shocking, right? So I think you sort of you automate this process when you go in there. You're trying to stick to the facts and the story, and of course you're telling the story of how people are being impacted, but seeing that on a daily basis, it sort of gets to you. um and I don't, perhaps I shouldn't say this, but I think many journalists who cover the war, they do end up spending a lot of time at the bars talking to each other about it. They do take up a lot of vices, including smoking, you know, cigarettes, cigars, whatever, you know, heavy tobacco users. It gets to you, right? Um, and I don't know. I don't mind sharing this piece of information, but yes, I had to go through a few years of sort of healing, where I even traveled to Peru and I did ayahuasca to sort of, I don't know. I mean, this is a very niche new sort of era, but I had to seek some medicinal help too at some point to really sort of get a fresh start afterwards.
So was it after Syria that you decided that it's my time in the Middle East is over and it's time to move back to the US, I guess?
Um, yes, I mean, I sought something new, something different. I really thought I had this really heavy energy on me, just constantly worrying about my safety and just constantly being exposed to tragedies and just constantly sifting through pictures and videos, trying to decide which one is okay to use, on public television. In the meantime, you're sort of sitting, behind the scenes, seeing all of this and experiencing it on a daily basis, and really not knowing when you might take this next unlucky step that, you know what I mean? I mean, we take all precautions, but you don't know when so many things are happening to journalists. It's worrying in a way, and I think it's silly for anyone to say, oh no, I'm so courageous is one thing, but fear is our best protector in those areas. You need to fear the danger to be able to protect yourself. So nobody's fearless going into those areas, but fear does take its own toll. So it's important to recognize, acknowledge what you're feeling, what you're dealing with. At the end of the day, as a journalist, when the story is told and everything is done, said and done, you sort of need to look into yourself and find a way to deal with it, cope with it, and sort of recover from it. And so when I felt like I was at that stage, ready to take it easy for a while, that's when the network that I was working with at the time, they were expanding their America operations, and they were like, well, would you like to take this instead? And I gladly came back to the United States, where I had, gone to college years before that.
I'm sure your mom would be, happy that you were back. At least, families are always worried. My parents are always telling me to come back. Yeah. So you moved around. So you moved to the US around 2017, right?
Yes.
So, before I moved to the US, I really wanted to, hear about the Arab Spring. How was that like? It was, because I was watching Arab Spring from India. I was a journalist as well, but I was a producer back then, and I was mostly doing the production work. And I saw the sea of people, in Egypt. How was that? What was that like? Around that time we all thought that it was a success, and democracy was sweeping in and people's power was there, but then it didn't turn out that well. How was that like, experiencing that and then thinking it's going to be a success, and then it turning out to be a damn squib?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely right. Arab Spring is nothing like what we know of it now. Now we understand it was sort of a phase that sort of fizzled out. I mean, certainly it did have some impacts, and it did cause some change. But at the time, the excitement was different, and also on the ground. Um, uh, and I guess I didn't do the entire North Africa, but I was in Egypt and I was in Libya, so I can speak about those experiences where people said this was the most sort of hopeful, optimistic moment in their whole lives. They really thought all these changes that they aspired for, that they dreamed about, were finally coming through. So this whole feeling of community, this whole society coming together for what they thought was going to be a brighter future, it was all vivid. You could sort of feel the moment with them. And I sometimes I feel like as journalists we are conductors, right? We sort of like conduct whatever energy we're in. If it's tension, we sort of feel it. If it's I just felt like I was part of that change.
Exactly.
Just
Did it feel
recount.
personal, the fizzling out? Did it feel like personally, were you like, oh my God, I thought it will work out. It's like, something you feel like work out, you were part of it. Did it feel personal?
I I mean, I wouldn't say personal, but mine is more of, I mean, I try never to sort of take over the story. I sometimes feel it. It's almost as if it's happening to me,
Yeah.
but I do always manage to separate myself from it, and it just sort of remains as an empathy, I guess. So I had a lot of empathy for those people at the time. And yes, I did feel the disappointment because all these people that I met, and probably at the time I remembered even by name, I was thinking of them, and I was just feeling sad and sorry that, that those dreams are not being fully accomplished. But also one more note, and this is very interesting because I was in Libya, and I asked this question because, knowing from experience, knowing what happens to uh, many countries once they lose stability and it sort of implores into this chaos and, civil war, it is very difficult to get out of it.
Mm.
And so when I put that question to some of those rebels, I'm gonna call them. I mean, a lot of them just civilians wanting more freedom. I said, at what cost? I understand how much you hate Gaddafi and all the reasons that legitimate, but what if this country ends up in what you're living now, effectively a civil war, but in an extensive period of time? Is that still worth it? The most interesting part for me was a lot of the people at the time,
Mhm.
they just said, at any cost. We just want him gone. There's no other future. We don't see any other future. He must go, period. And now I'm sort of going back to the story and talking to some of the people, and they're like, well, I mean, he was horrible, but not so bad after all, because look at, what we're going through right now. And this is not to make any point, about Gaddafi, but just to reflect on the fact that in that moment, it felt completely different. And yes, the end result sort of made a lot of people question everything. And again, like I said, I think for a lot of these countries, once you sort of completely lose any trace of stability, it's really, really hard to come back and build a system.
Yeah. And so coming back to the US, how was that like? How was that adjusting to, you're coming from this really intense region with intense, experiences, and then you are back in the US. How was that like?
It was like trying to get a life. I had to do I had to learn uh or I don't know, I guess for the first time I should say I had the privilege of living a normal lifestyle, and I absolutely loved it. It's just um being able to have something more permanent, a sort of more stable place where I'm based, and I'm not traveling, like I'm not on the road all the time, and I'm not worrying about, the next danger zone I'm gonna, have to survive and whatnot. I mean, it was just nice to have a normal life where you just, go out, have, to restaurants with your friends, you go out, have fun in the weekend. I mean, it was this is probably ridiculous to even talk about it, but to me, that had become so foreign. I mean, yes, I was taking like a lot of vacations here and there in between these hard deployments, but I realized for how long I had been missing that sort of just stable lifestyle, like living in a normal city, having a normal sort of 9 to 5 job where you go to an office and you have colleagues and you have your social life. That was unbeknownst to me for the longest time.
Like the small joys of life, which we take for granted.
Exactly. I mean, I had a very extraordinary lifestyle where I would have sort of 10 days off to do whatever I wanted with it. Um, but then, so, a lot of the times I would basically go on short trips to really have that sort of the moment to relax and to have fun. And then the next nearly 3 weeks would be just on the road, and this very like most intense 3 weeks somewhere near the Syrian border or all the way inside Aleppo, or it being embedded with the rebels, not knowing which part of the desert you're gonna sleep in the next day. And it was one of serious adventure.
Like food was also a problem, like not having food for days.
Um, it, there were times in Libya where we felt that, but when we do these sort of planned, like better executed deployments, like in and out of Syria, etc., I mean, we would be fine. I mean, I guess we would like take some stuff with us, or we would be in a place where we would be cared for by, whether we're embedded by the Turkish military, or perhaps we're in a local area where there's still like a few like food options available. I mean, we always had options, but I mean, to say the least, we certainly weren't in a comfortable place. You know what I mean? And sometimes when you're working with that sort of level of adrenaline, the body and the mind goes into this state of emergency where, I mean, yes, of course you need food and you do get food, but you're not necessarily seeking 3 meals a day. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
sometimes one just does it.
Wow. So, all those experiences, and then you're back in the US, did it impact the type of stories that you chose to cover in the US, your experiences back in the Middle East?
I mean, look, on one hand, I did like that, and I still do. I found, I guess, a whole new passion for myself. Um, I enjoyed the fact that I could finally leave, like take a break from all these stories about people causing conflicts. Um, well, it's more like where people are the victims, I guess. And I just sort of like went into stories about, ooh,
Sorry, it's I froze, so I had to. Sorry, that's fine. We'll chop it out. Yeah.
okay. So let me restart that sentence in that case. I think it sort of gave me it came as a, like fresh air to basically uh, not having to cover just man-made conflict all the time, sort of like man, making victims of other men. Just like it was a good to take a break from wars. And I found this new passion in sort of covering the environment and climate change. I mean, it's in a ways also man-made crisis, but it's instead of covering humans as victims, I think it felt, I found this new passion about, covering just the nature and the environment. And in a way, I guess I felt that there is no end to wars. I don't know, this probably sounds very bleak and pessimistic, but part of me felt like, and I think after so many years of that, it sort of weighs heavy on you. Um, and you're like, well, I don't know how much my storytelling was able to do anything about any of this. I mean, I'm sure at least it made some people aware, which is the point. But in some way, my mind went to thinking, this is never going to stop, and this is going to keep happening, but perhaps we should address something that can be stopped. I don't know, our destruction of the environment and what we're doing to our warming planet. I've been doing a lot of those stories lately, and I kind of like it. But on the other hand, it is important to say that whenever we have now the war in Ukraine for the last 2 years, and I see all my colleagues who were covering these other wars in the past. They are all like taking these deployments to Ukraine, and you get that itching on you because we also get these like regular trainings, right? The HEFAT, the hostile environment and first aid training. We renew that training every 2 years. And when, your employers, your editors, they know you are trained for this and you've been doing this for so many years. So they sort of immediately turn to you. And it's always a little tempting. It's like, oh, like, well, do I want to go there because it's the headlines? And I think you get this craving once you are used to documenting, the big highlight events of our year, of our time. When you're used to doing it so much, like being on the spot where all the, being under the spotlight, I guess, like seeing things firsthand that the whole world is talking about and being part of that voice, telling the world about it, it sort of becomes addictive. So I had to really control myself to make sure I don't end up in Ukraine. But since this conflict started in Israel and Palestine, I could not have that self-control after living in that area for 8, 9 years. I was like, no, I give up. I have to be there. So I'm gonna go.
Did you go?
I just went actually past, I believe it was November, yes.
Mm-hmm.
In November, I was there with the BBC team, and I mean, after years of having lived there and worked there, it was obviously knowing the language helps. It's a story that I was deeply connected to, that I could relate to. But it also taught me how much things have changed on the ground. Um,
Could you tell
and it
us
was,
how things have changed? Because you've lived there before, and now you went, as a new person, kind of after having stayed in the US for such a long time. I was coming to that point because I wanted to understand, like, first of all, how things have changed on the ground, and how do you see, the Western coverage? There's so much discussion, debate, even so much bitterness on both sides, if I may say. Even within the US, there's so much controversy about this is a democracy, and there have been discussions about whether we should let people protest or not in some way or the other. There's been so much division. So how do you see how things have changed, and how do you see Western coverage and what has transpired in the US as as a consequence of what's happening in the Middle East right now?
um, I should say that I was positively surprised,
Mhm.
pleasantly surprised, because when I lived there, all the way, going back to 2009, I think my last year there was about 2016 or something. All those years, the Western coverage was very, very skewed. Um, by Western, I think I should really pinpoint America in this case because uh, there were quite a bit of European publications that did a better job in terms of really exposing the truth and putting pressure. But honestly, the U.S. media just sounded and felt just so kind of like an accomplice almost. They were very they conveniently turned a blind eye, and I mean you could also tell from the politics, and so the media coverage was, I think, very much followed that. Um, I'm not sure much has changed politically, but uh, I couldn't believe that some of these you know best known corporate run entities, media outlets that previously didn't really bother to tell human stories, all the way from like inside Gaza and West Bank, uh, now really wanted to sort of, contract these locals, to really tell the story of what it is like to live in an under bombardment. This was not something that happened in the previous wars. I mean, for American journalists, it was considered like unsafe to even travel to Gaza, although some did make the exception and still went in there. But a lot of them didn't, and that was enough reason for them to just basically turn a blind eye. You know what I mean? And I think now it's a whole different story, and I'm very surprised that um, I don't know. It is promising. It is optimistic to see that they are, I think, doing a slightly better job. Is it enough? I'm not sure. But it's also really unprecedented what we're going through. I mean, as someone who's basically been through 3 of the previous Gaza wars, if you're not there, you don't know what it's like. And I could now clearly see that, I mean, the numbers also tell it quite easily in terms of the length of this current war, the number of fatalities, and just the sheer sort of magnitude of it is nothing like what we've seen in Gaza. And I mean, let me tell you, I think Gazan people, on average, it's very unfortunate to say this, but on average, they are used to living under bombardment. And a lot of the times, these are indiscriminate bombardment, unfortunately. And I think after these last 4 months now, I believe, I'm gonna go as far as to claim that I don't think there is a single person left out of the population of what, over 2 million, that is not heavily traumatized. There were times when I went there and I spent weeks, and speaking the local language really helps in terms of really forming a friendship with them and understanding about, you know, their lives and what they like to do, how they live, and their expectations from their families and their future. I really felt like I got immersed into this local Gazan life. In a way, it was sad in terms of how little they could expect from their future because of their limitations. Um, uh, I mean, I think it's basically one of the least free territories with some of the least free people on our earth. And they were already starting in a bad place, you know, being under a leadership like Hamas and therefore being exposed to all these things. Now I think what they're going through is just, I really don't think we understand. Khushboo, I feel like give it another year or so, I think our literature, our documentaries, I think only much later we will truly understand the magnitude and the severity of what's going on right now. I sort of feel it from those contacts that I still have, from seeing things with an eye that's already lived there and understands the dynamics. And so this is also like taking it, I guess, a few steps ahead. And you know, my prediction is that um, it's absolutely horrendous. I still continue living my life, you know, in LA, you know, I still go to the beach, I do my things, but it's sort of like it's in my head every day, whether it's 5 minutes or 1 hour. I can't stop really thinking about it.
What did you you said you went there in November. Did you work on a story? Did you cover any of the aspects of the war?
Um, I would have It was impossible for us to go inside Gaza. In previous wars, there had to be a ceasefire, even if it's just for a few hours, to create that, you know, safe corridor for journalists and humanitarian aid to go in, and then it would resume. Now, we never had this chance. The only time in these whole 4 months of this conflict, the only time journalists was ever allowed in was very short mission. We're talking literally an hour, if at all, where journalists were embedded with the Israeli army, sort of these ground troops, and they only took them to where they wanted to show. This would be mainly, you know, tunnels and such, and then took them straight out. So I am glad that I went there to see what we could see,
Mhm.
but honestly, we didn't really get to see the full story. Covering it just from the Israeli side, you know, obviously doesn't do justice.
I am so sorry. Well, I don't know what's happening. I'm freezing. My internet is fine, but yeah. Sorry, I'll just continue. And
I can tell that last part if you needed me.
I think they'll put you in the
Okay.
frame and do something with that. I don't know how they'll
Okay.
do it. They'll have to do it. And yeah, so that is I don't know what to say because I would say by God's grace, I've never been in a war zone, and I watch it on TV, and I know that I don't want to be there, and I cannot. God gives you only that much pain that you can handle. I don't think I can handle going to a place like that.
I mean, Khushboo, I think some of the highlights, and I don't think we have enough time to go through all my scare moments, but there were so many of them. I think just a few to really quickly mention are that I still sort of talk about with family and friends is that, you know, I couldn't believe the last, not this war, the previous war when I went. You know, the Israeli military made all of us journalists to sign these liability papers, basically saying, you know, if anything happens to me, I don't hold Israel accountable. And that already just gives you this like deep insecurity right from the outset, like before you even like step foot into the territory. And then you go in there and you're in the middle of these, you know, again, a lot of them quite indiscriminate air raids and bombardments, you know, from the air and from the sea. And, you know, you're staying at these, you know, few hotels right by the water, like right by the shoreline where most journalists are sort of, and aid workers are staying at. So you're sort of assuming that it's safer than other places. And I just remember one evening getting a phone call. It wasn't me personally getting the phone call, but either someone from the reception or another journalist, I can't remember, with IDF on the line, the Israeli army saying, you have 30 minutes to evacuate. We're going to bomb the hotel. And we had, well, we didn't use all the 30 minutes.
You
5 minutes where just grab your everything and run out, not knowing where we were going to go, Khushboo. Places are being bombed around us. The one place where we thought we were relatively safe, we had to evacuate. And I remember taking shelter at the Turkish Red Crescent Society, which was almost bombarded twice. And they kept giving their coordinates to the UN and whatever to, you know, make sure they are in that safe spot. And I remember to this day, I was contacting my, you know, contact people at the IDF and saying, look, this is what happened to us. And right now, this is where we're staying. And with the limited internet that we had, at least they had generators and at least we somehow had internet. Now, by the way, you don't have any of those in most places. So at least at that time, we had access to some power, some internet to be able to say, hey, this is where we are. This is my coordinates. Please send this information forward. And you just sort of like sit and pray.
Wow. I mean, like you said, it will take a lot of time for us to actually understand the magnitude of what's happening there. And I don't know, by then there will be so much destruction and so much loss that it will take a long, long time for not for us as well. We're just watching it on TV to even understand what happened. We are living our lives day to day and struggling with our own things and not understanding what's happening there. It's really enlightening talking to you. But I'm gonna go move towards a different topic. You are also associated with the Chinese publication. You work for CGTN. And I'm in DC, and anything everybody talks about is US-China tensions and how China is bad, and how there is everything is national security concern. How do you understand? You have so much experience as a journalist in different political, backgrounds and countries. You have traveled all over. What is your sense of what's happening in the US in terms of, some people say demonizing China, some people say addressing the China challenge, addressing the concern. How do you see this whole US China, obsession? As I feel it, it's people are quite obsessed with China these days. How do you see that?
I think in some cases, yes, it does start to feel like an obsession. But to just, for full transparency, I think it's important to say that that whole, 9 years or so in the Middle East, you asked if I was moving around. It's important to mention that I had been learning Chinese all the way back in when I was in college, and I was really into languages. That's a long story, but I even studied in China abroad when I was a student. So years later, when I took like a year and a half long break from all the Arab Spring, I think it was around 2012 or so, I actually was stationed in Beijing as a reporter for like a year and a half until I went straight back to the Middle East. But it's I liked well, first of all, I really liked the language, and I like the culture, and I feel like I had a chance to also connect with the Chinese culture and its people. I mean, my China experience was really great. Um, and of course, right, then years later, coming back to the US and now working for them, of course, it's completely different because yes, sort of you are, in this place where these are the two superpowers. And yes, of course, there's a lot of competition and rivalry, but sometimes it could get beyond that. And I think my experience so far is that I like the fact that I have a very healthy relationship in that I'm a freelance for CGT in America. So it allows me to be more free and independent in terms of my reporting. I can be affiliated with other media outlets, do work for others as well. So this is something I truly appreciate. But also I mean, I'm just gonna say it that I'm very happy that our bosses here, they really respect us a lot as seasoned journalists. I like the level of trust they have in us. They basically just allow us to uh, be the eyes on the ground, and they just allow me to report Los Angeles and California news and other areas that I go to the way I do. And I like that there isn't actually much intervention sort of editorially, I like that they trust our judgment, and more often than not, they actually go along with it. So I like the level of sort of respect and trust they have in a freelance journalist like myself. But I think you're right in that sometimes, even if you're a freelance, when you're working for them, the reactions can be a little off. I mean, it really depends on where you are, I guess. I mean, we all know and clearly see that America is super divided right now. You could be in a place like Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., New York, and it gets pretty diverse, not just diverse, but super international. People are from everywhere. And then the moment you start sort of moving away from these metropoles, places can get very homogeneous. They are not necessarily very well connected with the outside world. I mean, not in terms of, not commercially, not ideally, not in terms of ideas, and just not in terms of cultural exchange, So you do get a lot of places in America, as much as it's a superpower, it doesn't matter. You do get a lot of places in America where people don't really know that much about the outside world. I feel like if they had known, if they had traveled met some people, known just anything sort of firsthand, at least they would have some kind of a balance. I feel like a lot of people are just sort of really driven by, um, we've had a lot of fear mongering lately. We've had a lot of, people in power just, saying things that really completely influence people's minds and ideals in one direction and not in a very balanced, healthy way. I mean, there's a lot of, I think the biggest reactions that I have um, about China, against China, for working for China, are from people who either have lack of information or misinformation or even illy informed. And, those are all different things. Some of the people, they just either don't do their research, or in some cases, they've got like wrong information in their hands. They have a wrong understanding. In some cases, they are deliberately fed false information. And I think those are the people who have this like monstrous view of China. But on the other hand, people who have sort of this, more international connections and higher education and, better analytical skills, then, those people do ask the right questions. And I think, yes, this is something that's one of the big questions of our lives, because we're talking about the two superpowers, right? The two richest countries in the world. In what areas are they rivals, and is this just going to stay as a healthy competition, or is this going to go rogue at some point? I mean, we don't know, and these are fair questions. But as a journalist, I should just say that I'm happy that I am sort of spared from this conversation. I mean, yes, I do work for a Chinese outlet, but I'm glad that I'm not necessarily taking on these big political questions, and rather I'm sort of sticking to, covering, Los Angeles, California news, the environment, climate, and social justice issues. I realize that those are sort of my passion, and I like to, tell stories that sort of have a human impact, and, really just talk about things that impact people directly than these like big political questions, really.
Okay, that's perfect. Anything that you're excited about this year other than the election?
um I mean, honestly, I think that's a big one.
I'm
uh,
pretty excited about elections because I this is my first time in the US as a reporter in an election year. So I'm like, okay, this is going to be interesting. I'll get to travel, I'll get to see the US because I've only stayed in like big cities so far in the last 3 years. So I just feel like this is my chance to see real America. I see like a lot of like people who look like me and people who like speak my language, but yeah, like someone told I was telling someone that, oh, I love US, and it's like you love New York City, you have not seen anything beyond New York City, so travel beyond New York City and then tell me how you like the US.
That is absolutely true. I mean, Khushboo, I think some of the most exciting reporting comes from traveling to different areas at a time like this. It's US elections, everybody's hyped, and we've come to a point where most people have strong opinions, strong positions, and how they can change in either direction of the spectrum is just so fascinating to learn about. But I'm trying to keep my excitement about elections at bay. I don't know. I think my focus has become so much of the environment and climate and technology that for some reason I have my radar locked on sort of what's going on in the world of AI, and what's going to happen in this year's sort of COP summit, with the climate change, or the biodiversity summit. I'm just sort of like looking at those things, really. Maybe it feels dull for other
Oh, of course
journalists, but
not.
if you think about it, who becomes the next president of the US, is going to have a massive impact, a very sort of determining, a defining role in influence in the role that the US will play in these summits. And, if we're going to make any progress globally, will also depend on, the US-China partnership, really. If these two countries don't sort of come together and collaborate, especially in areas like this where they do have mutual interest, and they can, I don't want to use the word, police the rest of the world, but I should say, put pressure on the rest of the world, because those are the two biggest emitters. And if they don't commit, and if they don't, do it together, I don't think the rest of the world will have enough of incentive and the commitment to do it. So those are the events that I'm really watching closely.
Perfect. And before I let you go, I really want to know how many languages you speak, because you have been saying that I speak the Palestinian language, the local language in Palestine, and then a local language in Jerusalem. And how many languages do you speak?
Arabic and Hebrew, yes. Well, I mean, I don't like to say it, but
English.
it's 7.
7? Can you name them?
Yes.
Arabic, Hebrew, English, Chinese,
German, Spanish, and
German,
Turkish, obviously.
Turkish. 7. Wow. Okay. In India we speak a lot of languages, but I don't speak 7. But yeah, close, not very close, but yeah, okay. I
I'm
speak
not
many
I'm
languages.
not fluent in all of them, but a good commanding level, I would say.
I've been trying to learn Mandarin since 2018, and I'm still so bad at it. But I was watching a Chinese drama last night, and I'm glad that I was understanding a lot of it. So I was like, okay, not bad.
That's a lifelong venture, honestly. I feel that with you. I think Chinese is it's still the sort of, I'm still below that proficient level with them. It just takes two,
A
three
long
years to be
time.
away from it, that it just goes away. And like you said, then you have to get back into
Yeah.
movies
Fine.
and things to catch up.
And
It's a
I'm so
very
jealous of you. You're wearing cotton shirt and I'm here in sweater. And that's big. And I hate it because it's very cold. Yesterday it was fine, but and not one video goes by where I don't talk about weather, because I'm just waiting for summer.
it's
It's too much for me. My
it's
country is
the
hot.
Oh, right. Yes. It's the trade-off for it's a little yeah, I mean it's a trade-off for being away from the hot spot of the news, in Washington, D.C. You guys are like in the sort of like the brain of the country with the White House, State Department. That's, that's where all the news bubble up. And here we sort of feel like we're not really in a place where the news happens every day, but we get to live the good life and the climate.
Yeah, I hope so. I've never been to the West Coast, but soon if I'm there, I know you are coming over here in May. So, I'll see you. Hopefully I'll see you here.
Please, I would love that.
Thank you, and I'll see you around. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Definitely.
Bye.
Thank you, Khushboo. I appreciate it.